Welcome to the Into AI Safety podcast, where we discuss the challenges facing the field of AI safety and those who work within it. This show aims to provide the foundation and resources needed to get up to speed on safe and ethical AI. As always, I am your host, Jacob Hames. During the podcast, you may hear this sound, which denotes that I have included at least one link related to the content that preceded the sound. The purpose of this is to allow for citations and providing resources without breaking the flow of conversations. As per usual, items mentioned during asides will have links in the show notes as well. This interview was recorded on October 11th, 2025, and asides were recorded on November 13th, 2025. Sometimes we should really take a step back and think critically about the assumptions we make when justifying our actions, and my guest today has made a career in doing so in an incredibly rigorous manner. He is currently an assistant professor of philosophy at Vanderbilt University and a research affiliate at the ANU MINT Lab. In his own words, his research sits at the intersection between bounded rationality, inquiry, and value theory. And in my words, he tries to figure out how real people, who have to live with real-world limitations, can improve the ways they make decisions. Our focus will be on a common idea which underpins most of the common narratives about AI, the singularity hypothesis. Don't worry, you don't need to know what that means yet. We'll go over that, as well as the reasons why it may not hold as much water as many think it does, what to actually be worried about, and the real downstream impacts that the singularity hypothesis has had on both the discourse in AI and our world. With that, I'm excited to introduce Dr. David Thorstad.
Hi, I'm David Thorstad. I'm a philosopher at Vanderbilt University. I have a couple of research programs. The one I'm talking about today is on long-termism and AI safety. And I have another research program on bounded rationality, just what does rationality require of bounded agents like us?
Okay. And in one sentence, what are you trying to accomplish with this academic work?
In my work on long-termism, I want people to spend more time and more money on some of the most pressing global problems affecting the world today.
Awesome. And I know that you've written a lot on long-termism, and also you have a blog called Reflective Altruism, and you've also worked on bounded rationality. And I believe there are a number of works that you have that are going to be coming out in the near future. So can you just share a bit about how you got interested in this space and where your work is going, and maybe what we'll see in some of those new works coming out?
Sure. In terms of how I got into the space, it was mostly a job at first. I took a postdoc in 2020 at the height of the pandemic with Hilary Graves, who I think is one of the absolute best philosophers alive and happens to be the former director of the Global Priorities Institute.
Mm-hmm.
Good university was Oxford, and part of the job was working on long-termism. And so I got started on long-termism as part of my job. I continue working on long-termism because I think it's important. I think it's an idea with a lot of influence, and I think it's important to get these ideas right.
What would you say long-termism is, just in case maybe I misunderstand it or, not quite thinking about it the same way you are?
So at a minimum, long-termists will think, to quote McCaskill, that making the long-term future go well should be an important moral priority of our time. Many of them hold much stronger views that by far the most important thing to do right now is to do what we can to make the long-term future go well, and that's generally the kind of a view that I'm going to be targeting. As you weaken the long-termist view, you're going to get a view that's more and more plausible. I'm going to have some disagreements, but fewer. Just in terms of where my work's going, I have, as you mentioned, a couple of papers coming out on long-termism, making a case against long-termism, and on AI safety, pushing back against some influential arguments there, the singularity hypothesis and some instrumental convergence or power-seeking arguments. And so the next thing I'm doing is wrapping them all together in a book. It's called Beyond Long-Termism. And the idea of the book is to wrap together a web of challenges to long-termism that should hopefully together be large enough to push us into more traditional short and medium-termist alternatives. And then briefly to conclude the book, I want to make a case for some short and medium-term alternatives.
So can you just break that down a little bit for me? If, like, I personally don't have a ton of experience with the, like, philosophy space. So I'm just, if you could just provide a little bit more context.
Sure. Many of the objections you'll hear to long-termism are what you might call one-shot objections. They'll tell you here's the one and only one fatal flaw of long-termism. And this claim that's supposed to be the fatal flaw has to be a very strong claim because the long-termists start off looking pretty good. And so usually I have skepticism about these kinds of claims. They'll say, for example, if you just understand that duties to benefit future people are very small, or if you just understand that some duties to repair present injustice trump all future duties, long-termism is false.
Okay.
And so the premise of the book is I don't want to say that. I want to make a large number of overlapping challenges that I think don't require that much to buy in. In terms of normative assumptions, a lot of people should be able to believe them. And in terms of descriptive assumptions, I don't want to be assuming anything too crazy about the world. And I just want to argue that if you pack on enough fairly normal kinds of objections to long-termism, you might snowball into a case against long-termism.
Okay, so just to make sure I'm following this correctly, you're pro long-termism in some senses, but you have also, like, strong reservations or preferences against aspects of long-termism as well. Is that correct?
Long-termism is usually understood as a claim about what we ought to do. That what we ought to do is to do what we can to make the long-term future go as well as possible. And it's understood comparatively as doing these things being more important, or in some sense a stronger duty, than doing what we can to solve poverty, to solve global health, to solve animal rights in the short term. And so I have sympathy with the long-termists' idea that the future matters, but I don't have as much sympathy with the long-termist proposal that the most important things for us to be doing right now are to make the future go as well as possible.
Gotcha. Okay. There's a lot to unpack in that whole space, but I guess I'd like to go back just a little bit to something that you had mentioned while you were going through that, which is you've written papers on against the singularity hypothesis and AI power seeking and sort of addressing some issues that you have with the arguments that are commonly discussed in those. And so we actually met because you did a little talk for a part on against the singularity hypothesis, and I thought it was really interesting, and you approached this problem in a way that I felt most other people weren't doing. As the singularity hypothesis is the main subject of this episode, I figured it would make sense to take a second to explicitly define it. According to our guest, who has looked into this far more than I have, the singularity hypothesis was popularized by Werner Vinge and Ray Kurzweil in the 90s and early 2000s, and has since been picked up by various philosophers such as David Chalmers and the Reddit community r/singularity. Instead of providing the definition outright, I find it's more helpful to build up to the scenario and then label it. At some point, we may create a system which is capable enough that it can iterate on its own design, making a subsequent version which is better in some meaningful way in, say, 2 months. This new version can also improve itself and do so even more efficiently than the previous versions, this time taking 1 month. And then the pattern continues on. This is called recursive self-improvement. As a result of the accelerated growth I just described, the technology eventually reaches a point where it is improving at a rate faster than we can comprehend, And as a result, human society will change dramatically in a very short amount of time. While this is the general vibe, the formal definition of the singularity hypothesis has a few characteristics. First, there is some quantity, which, in the case we are primarily discussing today, is typically considered intelligence. Second, that quantity experiences a time of accelerated growth, meaning that the rate of improvement itself is increasing, not just that improvements are being made. Finally, as a result of this accelerated growth, there will be a discontinuity in human history. If you're interested in this, I highly recommend reading David's Against the Singularity Hypothesis, but I guess that goes without saying since he's literally on my show. So before we get into Against the Singularity Hypothesis, what prompted you to write it? Why did you think that was important to do?
Sure, it was a methodological stance. I've been pretty firm in this space that I think it's important to write serious papers and put them past peer review by experts at good journals on either side of these issues. And what frustrated me was I was often being asked to engage with forum posts, with Discord chats, with blog posts. And I write a blog, don't get me wrong, there's nothing wrong with that, but that wasn't at the standard that I wanted to be responding to.
Yeah, I mean, yes, there is value to peer review, right?
Yes. So I think academics tend to, in general, have a pretty high bar for when we're going to come in and respond. And around 2021, I started wanting to write a response to some of the AI safety worries on the extreme end, on the existential risk end. And there was at that time one with enough currency to merit a response, namely the singularity hypothesis had the backing of Dave Chalmers, is an excellent philosopher. Nick Bostrom is an excellent philosopher, and had both written about this. So this was something I wrote about, not because it was the most popular. I think it was fading in popularity a little bit then. It was just because it was the only one with enough for me to dig into and get a response out.
Gotcha. And then we'll discuss this in depth, but I wanted to also, before we start, there was a shift that happened during the workshop and discussion that we had that I witnessed, and I was very tuned into it at the time as well, because something similar had happened to me around that time. But I'm curious how you would characterize what the response is to the fully fleshed out argument that you present in the singularity hypothesis, if someone is fully bought into the singularity hypothesis going into the conversation, just so that we have that grounding perspective, because I think it is valuable to say, okay, this is something that we see sometimes, at least, before we even go into it.
Sure. I get two responses. Just to get the hypothesis on the table, the singularity hypothesis says there's this quantity, artificial general intelligence, or rather, the intelligence of artificial agents. And this quantity intelligence is going to see a period of not just growth, but accelerating growth, which is going to be sustained until we reach a discontinuity, which is meant to be a big deal, like crossing the event horizon of a black hole, hence the name. Typically, accelerating growth is meant super exponential, i.e. hyperbolic, i.e. gets you an asymptote in finite time, and typically the discontinuity is meant to be intelligence orders of magnitude beyond humanity.
And so this also sets aside the maybe issues with the construct of intelligence as well.
Yes. So when I wrote this paper, most of the responses to the singularity hypothesis I did not like, and that's why I thought we needed another one. There's one that I have some sympathy for, namely, it's really hard to say what you mean by intelligent. It's just people thought that one sentence killed the worry, and it really doesn't. I think Dave Chalmers made the point really well, namely, take anything that's kind of intelligence-like and goes up at the appropriate rate and rerun the singularity hypothesis there. So take a agglomerate of 100 different IQ tests and SATs and other kinds of reasoning abilities and benchmarks and say that abilities on those are going to rise at an accelerating rate until performance is well beyond the human level. And they're just saying that's not intelligence, even if that's true, is maybe not going to be very reassuring.
Gotcha. So I think that's really helpful for me as well, as someone who doesn't fully align with the idea of intelligence. Like, I think it's very problematic for a number of reasons. But it's okay if we're using intelligent as the word here, but really we're talking about this sort of competency on these like reasoning benchmarks. And yeah, that helps me sort of contextualize it as well, I think. Okay, cool. So we're setting aside that we're just accepting sort of increasing intelligence that's at a not just exponential but hyperbolic rate. And was that defined by someone? Was there a person that has come up with this singularity hypothesis as like the formal definition?
Yeah.
Or is it okay?
So that's
Can
what's
you
gonna
explain a little
come
bit
up
about that?
later when we talk about responses. Until very recently,
Okay.
everybody agreed that the singularity was obviously about intelligence, but was about not just growth, but accelerating growth, and was about reaching a discontinuity to be analogized with crossing a singularity, hence the name. And so the place to look is the first anthology on the singularity hypothesis was the Eden and colleagues anthology. It's 2012. I think it's Springer. I cited in my paper. Right in the editor's introduction, they do what they're supposed to do, and they say a singularity hypothesis does three things. It specifies a quantity like intelligence, like GDP. It says the quantity is going to accelerate and, grow at an accelerating rate until we reach a fundamental discontinuity in human history. And that was settled. So I get two responses to my work. Response number two is the one I don't like, is people say, oh no, we never said that. So you will read on the internet the last couple of years, people have been peddling the weak singularity hypothesis, which means artificial intelligence is going to grow, but we never said it was going to grow at an accelerating rate, and it's going to grow until AGI, but we never said it was going to be, orders of magnitude more intelligent than the leading human. And, that's fine if you want to make that claim. That's just an entirely different claim that needs an entirely different discussion. So I really don't want to let people opt out of saying what they said. And I think it's telling that when you see people peddling that claim today, you look at the footnotes, who they cited the definition to, and they didn't cite it to anybody because, they're not drawing on historical usage of the term. They're trying to put the word weak in front of it and use the word weak to backpedal out of what people said.
Gotcha. Okay. And then what's the other
response is some sympathy. I think I mentioned that around 2020, 2021, when I wrote this, people were thinking that the singularity hypothesis is very strong and it wasn't that grounded in data, and there were these other arguments that were getting better and the data behind them was getting a lot better, and that maybe there were just many reasons to be concerned about AI that had nothing to do with the concept of intelligence explosion. And so I think a lot of people have been souring a little bit on the singularity.
Gotcha. Okay. And that's, I guess then just putting those things together is that seems to be supported by your very thorough investigation into what the singularity hypothesis is, what it implies, and what would need to happen in order to get there, which is the against the singularity hypothesis.
That's the hope, yes. And I don't want to say that there hasn't been pushback. There are counter models. I think Epic AI has one. Some open philanthropy people try to construct them. So, there are counter models if you want counter models. But often I've gotten the other responses rather than counter models.
Gotcha. And I guess another thing, and sort of building off of the first reaction that we discussed, which is people sort of put weak in front of the singularity hypothesis and say that's not what we really meant. I have a lot of trouble with this personally because I find that we can't really say this in a vacuum. The idea of the singularity hypothesis, the idea of this massively, continually acceleration phenomenon has had concrete impacts on policy, on what people prioritize, on whatever. And so some people might say, oh, well, argument of does the singularity hypothesis actually matter? Does it hold water, etc.? Is essentially intellectual masturbation. It would be an argument that one could have about it, but the impact has been significant. So I feel like we can't really disregard it in that way. And so I was wondering, you've done a lot more thinking about this than I have. What are some of those examples, like concrete examples that you see or you feel are out there about this narrative having a direct impact?
That's right. I think that it's important to stress that whatever you think of this argument, it is one of the very most influential arguments for existential risk from AI, and that arguments for existential risk from AI are incredibly impactful right now. In philanthropic funding, movements like effective altruism have made hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars of annual pivots away from things like saving lives for $5,000 a life right now and towards very expensive salaries in Silicon Valley and Oxford aimed at addressing AI safety. So if these folks are wrong, you're going to have a lot of philanthropic misspending on the basis of
And
AI worries.
just piggybacking off of that, and we'll then go back to this like philanthropic misspending. But there is also a consideration that like it's so minimal compared to what is being spent by big tech. So like I don't know, maybe it's good that some of it's going to this. Also, it's a lot of it's going away from well-defined interventions that we know help people right now. So I thought that this was going to be a pretty straightforward aside, but in doing some investigation, things got a little bit more complicated. There's a pretty decent blog post titled An Overview of the AI Safety Funding Situation, which seems to do a good job of reporting funding for AI safety on first glance. It reports that in 2024, 111 million USD went towards AI safety, with over 50% of that coming from the charity organization Open Philanthropy. However, cross-referencing these numbers with Open Philanthropy's self-reported funding information indicates that they gave around 40% more funding in the Navigating Transformative AI category. I'm not sure why the blog post has a number that is so much lower. While perusing OpenPhil's funding docs, I noticed that many AI safety orgs, such as Constellation, FAR AI, and MATS, were receiving funding under a different category, Global Catastrophic Risks Capacity Building. Adjusting for this, the total amount OpenPhil sent towards AI safety in 2024 was around 136 million USD, which bumps up the total amount spent on AI safety in 2024 to 180 million USD, approximately. To contextualize this, I checked the amount of funding that OpenPhil provided to organizations in the global health and well-being, global health and development, global health R&D, global health public policy, and human health and well-being categories. Together, this funding totaled $280,000, just over twice what they provided towards AI safety. During the same year, private investment in AI was $150 billion. That's over 850 times more, and that's just investment in startups. Don't forget that big tech was projected to spend almost 2 times that on AI infrastructure alone in 2025, and bidding wars have top AI talent receiving 8 figures as signing bonuses. I guess I'm just saying that, like, there's so much money in the AI space as well, and such a small portion of it is this philanthropic funding.
That's right. I think 2 important things to stress. The first is that at least the movements I talked about, effective altruism and rationalism, are very concerned about the marginal dollar and about doing the best thing you can with the marginal dollar. So when they're pulling away funding from very effective, very well evidenced short-term challenges, they've got a pretty high bar for justifying that. But the main thing to talk about is one of the impacts of these existential risk arguments has been a capture of the term in the field AI safety. To talk about safety from AI should involve any number of challenges, not just all of us dying, but things like militarization of AI, things like massive theft of information by foreign governments. And there's been a lot of push to concentrate the term and concentrate research and concentrate philanthropic funding on the existential risks in a way that makes it harder to get money and attention for the other risks. And also, if you're skeptical about the existential risk, you'll say, okay, the money's going to safety, but it's not actually going to the safety challenges that we need money to address. And I think that's the
Yes.
worry that a lot of academics have.
Okay. Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that. I think actually at the time that this will have come out, there will be an episode on Muckrakers where we talk about how AI safety, quote unquote AI safety, has actually really been just promoting some really bad outcomes in the long term. And then I guess like building on that and bringing in something that was relevant, more relevant, maybe half a year ago at this point. But AI 2027, to me, sort of characterizes the concerns, the mentality, the perspective of this group of people that is like fully bought into the singularity hypothesis. Where does that fit into you? How is that related? And what was your reaction as well to like having a piece like that come out?
I was pretty disheartened by this. I think that the people involved are serious people and that they could have done better. I think this was a piece that went very viral very quickly, in part due to intentional presentation, in part
Yeah.
due to bringing in a blogger to write a story. That almost all of the reads were views on Twitter, and if you're lucky, somebody skimmed their homepage. That this wasn't a piece designed for deep engagement with the arguments, and that when you looked deeply into the arguments, they really weren't there. And so I was unhappy that what I saw as people who are capable of delivering really well grounded research were trying to package into a story research that in many cases didn't take place, and when it took place, just wasn't at the standard it would need to be to establish their views.
To their credit, like the narrative that is crafted and the way that it is presented with the sort of like it's compelling as a story. And yeah, I think that allows for more disingenuous, maybe not even disingenuous, just shoddy or yeah, could have been better background research. But so as someone who's like obviously you care about rigor, like you have gone to great lengths to get your stuff published in journals and in other academic settings, and you see this lack of rigor in maybe something that's getting way more views than what a blog post of yours does. I guess I'm not 100% positive about that, but that's an assumption.
Yes.
Yeah. And how do you like, what do you do about that? How do you deal with it and think like, how can we improve? And I guess this is also somewhat from my point of view as someone who is also in a similar boat of like, I'm really trying to do something rigorous and effective, and it's just difficult to reach people.
Yeah, I think it's very important, and very important to many of my opponents often, to reach people not only effectively, but with the right kind of persuasion. Everybody knows that if you want to persuade a lot of people, you can do it fairly easily. You can persuade people that vaccines cause autism, that COVID is fake, that Trump won the election, that there's this massive crime wave in democratic cities where we need to send the National Guard. Persuading people on the internet is not hard. What's hard is getting people on the internet to give you their valuable time to really think carefully through an issue. And I think if you're not doing that, you'd better be very, very sure that you're already right. Because if you're wrong, you're going to be spreading misinformation and people aren't going to catch it.
Okay, interesting. No, yeah, I think that makes sense, and I agree with that. Yeah, add it to the stack of things that cause autism, right? Yeah, I honestly can't even engage with that. Like, it's just like, okay, I can't. Moving on from just like the singularity hypothesis, it's not just the singularity hypothesis, right? There are other arguments, there are other narratives that maybe mirror or have similar patterns to the singularity hypothesis argument. What do you see them as? Like, what do you see as? I have some in mind, but I'm very curious to hear what yours are.
Yeah, I'd like to talk about some of the others if you have others in mind. I think the most obvious is the time of perils hypothesis. So people will tell me, okay, David, I don't need the singularity hypothesis to be concerned about existential risk. But then they'll say, in response to some of my other work, here's what I do need. I need the claim that now is a very dangerous time. Risk is at 10% or 20% in the century. But if we just make it through this dangerous time, risk is going to drop by 4 or 5 orders of magnitude. It's going to drop very quickly, and it's going to stop there for about 1 billion years. That's the time of perils hypothesis.
That would be really convenient.
Would be it's very convenient, right? I've got theorems showing this is exactly the form of the claim that they want, and lo and behold, it happens to be true. And then I say, okay, lo and behold, why is it true? And I go through their arguments, and they're like, yeah, okay, those arguments didn't work, but here's the one you, David Thorstad, didn't address. If AI doesn't kill us, it's going to get so smart so fast, it's going to guide us through, our cosmic destiny and mitigate all risks. Now, there's a lot to say about that. But I think the first thing to say is if you don't have a singularity story and you want to be attributing these kinds of powers to AI, you really need to tell me where they're coming from. And they're coming from a singularity story.
Gotcha. So even if you yourself are like, you're like, okay, singularity, maybe that's far-fetched, but XYZ, and so because of that, we're going to get to this state, and in that state, everything will be fine. And what you're saying is when you actually connect the dots between XYZ and final state, there is some form of singularity hypothesis happening in there.
In the most popular argument for the time of perils, that's right. And you really need this, because if you really think not just this century, but every century has 10 or 20 or 30% of existential risk, if you run the math that actually works really badly for the value of trying to improve the long-term future. And it works really badly for the value of trying to improve the long-term future, just because theorem, it shows the future is probably going to be short. And if the future is probably going to be short, we should have a party now.
Well, that's optimistic.
Yes, now to be clear, I don't hold this view. I think risk is a lot lower than people think it is. But if you think risk is very high now and you don't have a time of perils view, you really are going to have a very hard time caring about the future, because you just shouldn't think there's much of a future to be had.
Because everything is going to be high risk forever.
Yeah, it's like getting sick in your 90s. Okay, you cure this one, and then there's going to be another, versus getting sick in your 30s. The balance of do you want to have fun now versus invest in the future really changes.
Gotcha. Okay, yeah, that does make sense. Yeah, I guess what I've been thinking about is this sort of, I guess time of perils is definitely fits this, but it's this maybe a term that Igor actually introduced to me on the interview that I did with him on this podcast was, what was it? It's the Pascal's mugging is what it is.
Yeah.
Where you've sort of gotten into a situation where there's this like infinite gain on one side and infinite peril on the other, and you have to do the thing, whatever I say, and then we'll get to that infinite gain. Otherwise, we'll get to that infinite suffering. And it's so, in doing so, you're sort of hijacking humans' sort of predisposition to have a bias towards optimism and like using that to your advantage to get people to do whatever it is you want them to do. To understand this little thought experiment, we should really be going all the way back to 1713, when Nicolaus Bernoulli introduced the St. Petersburg paradox. No, this wasn't the Bernoulli behind the numbers or the theorem. That was his uncle and doctoral supervisor. The original framing introduces a game in which you flip a coin at each stage. If the coin lands on heads, you double the amount of money in the prize pool. But if it lands on tails, the game ends. You then start with 2 money in the prize pool. The expected value of playing this game is winning a prize of infinite money. So, a canonical rational actor, in the game theory sense, should pay any amount of money for a chance to play this game. But in practice, it'd be pretty stupid to pay $20 for a single round. Pascal's mugging is simply a reflavoring of this problem such that it doesn't technically require dealing with infinite amounts of stuff. This can get really in the weeds really quickly. And if you're into that, check out the show notes because I added a bunch of relevant links in there, including stuff about ergodicity, which Igor from the other podcast I host mentioned to me. But for now, I'll just hit the most important part. Fundamentally, these thought experiments are only valid if we are willing to accept the alternate and speculative realities they exist in. Why would we believe that whoever is offering this game actually has the funds to cover a 100-head streak? Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, so we should be extremely skeptical that we could win even 10 consecutive rounds.
Yeah, so the underlying decision theoretic issue here is one that my old colleague Hayden Wilkinson calls fanaticism.
Okay.
Namely, most decision theories like maximize expected value have the following feature. Take any finite payoff like $1 million, and take any really small probability like 1 in a quadrillion. There's some insanely good payoff like 10 to the 950th years of happy life, such that I should take that insanely high payoff at a 1 in a quadrillion chance, rather than the sure, great payoff. So the idea is that high probability good things can always be outweighed by arbitrarily low probability great things.
Okay.
And some people have thought that this is what's going on with long-termism, because if there could be 10 to the 40th people in the future, then if I have a 10 to the minus 20 chance of making that happen, that's still gonna, in expectation, going to give me like 10 to the 20 lives, and that's just going to swamp out an expected value calculation. So a lot of people have argued, and I don't know if I want to push this line myself, but that one of the attractive features of long-termism is that it's promising us very small probabilities of very large gains, and that a lot of decision theories tell you to like very small probabilities of very large gains.
Okay. But why do we do that?
So I'm not clear where I stand on fanaticism. I think a lot of people would like to reject it. I think to be fair to my opponents, it's very hard to find a decision theory that does reject it. So for example, you can bound the utility function. You can say, there's some amount of value that no intervention can pay you more than that. But then when you're very, very, very close to there, you get a crazy result. Like, say that 10 billion people being alive is half as good as the world could get. Then if I add 10 to the 297th power people, that's only as good as the first 10 billion people. And there's nothing about the number 297. I could have made it larger and larger and larger. So if you bound utilities, you really have to be pretty not happy about the value of adding additional good things to the universe, and that looks a little bit arbitrary. And then the other move you can make, there's lots of things you can make, but you can go after the probability function. You should say we really shouldn't care about small probabilities. And I think that's right, but it's actually hard to say that in a way that doesn't raise a lot of problems.
And this, I think, bleeds into a series that you have put a lot of work into on your blog about exaggeration of risks, like particularly within the effective altruism, EA, long-termism space. It seems to me, based on looking at those, you believe that a lot of risks, not just AI safety, have been blown out of proportion. I guess I'm interested. So just like, what are your top three? And then also, like, what are you actually concerned about?
Good. So I think at least within the long-termist community, most of people's probability mass for existential risk is on AI followed by pandemics. So in terms of what do I think have been most exaggerated and what have I argued against is AI followed by pandemics. In terms of just sheer magnitude of exaggeration, I think probably going to get in trouble for saying this. Climate change is very bad. We should work to prevent climate change. That is not because it's going to kill all of us. That is very, very unlikely that climate change would kill all of us. And so I think the people pushing climate change as an existential risk are wrong. The people claiming that we shouldn't work on climate change because it's not an existential risk are also wrong. But I think that maybe would round out the three.
Gotcha. And so just to make sure I'm understanding there, you're saying it's not going to kill all of us. So if your argument is that it's an existential risk, that's bad. However, it's going to be a big problem. It's going to be very harmful and have negative impacts, and we should be addressing it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then what is it that you do that you are concerned about right now?
I'm concerned about a lot of things. I think personally, we're recording this in mid-October 2025. I'm
Mm-hmm.
more concerned than I used to be about authoritarianism. I'm sitting at a university and we think of
Yeah.
ourselves as, one of the last bastions of resistance of this kind of stuff. And precisely
Yeah.
because of that, my government is coming after us. So to give you an example, I'm sitting at Vanderbilt University, which is currently deliberating President Trump's compact for preferential treatment under some fairly unprecedented conditions. And because I'm untenured, I currently don't want to say anything more about my opinion about the compact. And I think that might maybe say more about where we are than
Anything that you could say. Yeah. With all that's going on regarding Trump and his regime, administration, it's easy to lose track of important happenings. This one is called Trump's Compact for Academic Excellence in Higher Education. In early October, letters were sent to 9 universities, including MIT, University of Arizona, and Vanderbilt, asking them to provide feedback on this compact, although it also seems clear that the intent is for the universities to sign it. Most of the 9 have already rejected doing so publicly. This request and the wording of the compact is nothing short of a threat to these institutions, including the statement that the universities are free to develop models and values other than those below, if the institution elects to forego federal benefits. The requirements include stopping DEI programs, enforcing strict sex at birth based gendering, instituting limits on accepting international students, and contains rather explicit viewpoint discrimination by singling out conservative ideas for protection. On November 5th, there was a protest held by Vanderbilt faculty and students who are quite disappointed in the response that Vanderbilt leadership has had, as they have not explicitly said there is no way they will sign it, like many of the other universities. I guess we'll have to see how this one plays out. And the part that is really freaky to me from that is that we are not even a year in.
Yeah. So, when we hear these worries about artificial intelligence entrenching stable authoritarianism and stable totalitarianism, of course, technology is a tool for authoritarianism, and that's a worry. But
Mm-hmm.
you can be concerned about authoritarianism without telling narratives about hypothetical futures. And that this might be an example of one of the spaces where the focus on the very most extreme risks or the very most speculative future risks is sometimes coming at the expense of concern about or even sometimes support for policies and people causing risks in the present.
Yeah. I mean, I totally agree. I guess one thing as well would be like stories that we're hearing right now that are actively happening right now. One could argue that not too long ago, they might have been considered as something too far-fetched to happen in the near future. And so, yeah, I think that's also telling as to like what can happen now and where to set our threshold. It's easy for that threshold to climb up as things worsen, I think.
Yeah. And to be fair, pushing, I think, a little bit away from what concerns me in my private life, there are major concerns that are probably more pressing, namely poverty.
Mm-hmm.
Many, many people still live on less than $2 a day.
Mm-hmm.
Not $2 in their currency, $2 in purchasing power parity. Whatever you can buy for $2 is what they can buy every day. Many people, over 1 million, die every year, many of them children, from entirely preventable tropical diseases.
Mm-hmm.
We know how to address all of these things, and we're not doing it because we don't want to shell out the money. So at the same time that I complain about some of my civil liberties being taken away. I don't want to minimize the extent of some of the global challenges like poverty and like global health, which probably in the scale of things would be more important at the moment.
That does make sense. I definitely feel, like, personally feel the authoritarianism aspect more pressingly as well, but I do think that, we need to be more cognizant of what, as far as I can tell, like, effective altruism was more into maybe a decade ago, a little over a decade ago, with regards to buying malaria nets and things like that. Again, like, with regards to what I'm concerned about, it's not just the authoritarianism, but like the extreme concentration of wealth and power. So making the poverty issues worse and more expansive, I guess. So currently it is in some locations, expanding the locations where this extreme poverty is happening, disempowering people, and sort of also in turn entrenching authoritarianism. My hope is that you have arguments to make me feel better about that. Is that true?
No, sorry. I'm also concerned. I have arguments that I will make in my book to make people work on these problems, but I don't think I want to talk people out of concern for poverty or for authoritarianism or for concentration of wealth and concentration of power. And I don't think that these are particularly difficult problems to demonstrate. So if listeners ever find themselves doubting whether a given concern about artificial intelligence is going to come to pass or whether a given contribution is going to help or hurt that, I don't think there's much reason to doubt that we know what to do in many areas to improve the lives of the poor, improve the lives of the sick, to promote democracy. And so these are always fairly safe things that we can do.
Okay. And well, that's unfortunate for me. I wish there was an easy answer. But I guess going into, like, how can we address these? What maybe are the ways that, or like the overview of the arguments for, like, why to address them and how to address them, and potentially even ways that groups which believe that they are doing good might be, like, contributing towards those issues as well.
Honestly, I think there's a lot of very important local debates about particular solutions, but I think a very good place to start is following the money. To ask, are our interventions taking money from wealthy nations and putting that money in the hands of people who need it in poorer nations? Are they taking money from wealthy nations and putting that money in the hands of Silicon Valley and venture capitalists? And I think the answer to that question can tell you a lot about the implications for global poverty and global health of what you're doing. So if you're, for example, buying malaria nets and shipping them for free overseas, or if you're literally making cash transfers overseas, this is probably reducing the concentration of wealth and power. If you're paying into a research lab in California, you're probably increasing the concentration of wealth and power. And so I think it's often in these spaces relatively clear what kinds of things you would want to do if you were more concerned or less concerned. There's some areas at the border. So, of course, when you get into a space like animal advocacy, a lot of people really want to give to local organizations that employ local, not only workers, but local leaders. And a lot of foreign philanthropists think that they can more effectively do good if they give money to NGOs operating from abroad. And, these kinds of debates get much more complex. But certainly when we're thinking about paying money to AI researchers versus sending money to countries that are not currently benefiting from the AI boom, I don't think it's difficult to say which one is going to reduce wealth and power concentration.
Okay. Yeah. But so many of the people that are in this space, that's how they're getting paid. To an extent, that's how I'm getting paid. I mean, I'm not getting paid for this,
Yeah.
but what does that take to sort of grapple with that? And how do you think someone goes about doing that?
It's hard. So I should be upfront. I took a postdoc funded by money from effective altruists primarily. I am currently on a grant from the Survival and Flourishing Fund, is coming from Silicon Valley. I've taken many grants of this sort. So when we talk about the influence of money, especially on an industry like academia that doesn't have very much, money does have a lot of power, and it is one of the reasons that so many people get into the space. And it's hard because if you can't reduce the flow of the money, there's only so much that can be done to stop the space from developing. That's why philanthropists invest in an area, is because they know they're going to build it up. And so we really need to be having the debate that the effective altruists wanted to have, namely for the folks who've got money and want to spend it, where should they be spending it? And I think we need to convince some of those folks to spend less on existential risk. And then, fewer people will be working on existential risk simply because their organizations haven't been funded.
Okay. Yeah. But also, then, isn't it sort of like a problem that there are so few people that have that authority, that are controlling such a significant swath of philanthropic funding, which not just philanthropic funding, but also then funding for entire fields? Like, how do we address that? Or are you just sort of saying, like, we have to get them to change their minds?
I think this is very important, that attitudes towards philanthropy have changed a lot. When Rockefeller wanted to set up his foundation in the 19th century, he wanted to give a bunch of money to set up a charitable foundation, and Congress said, no, you can't do it. And they said, you can't do it because we don't like you, we don't trust you, and we don't want you pushing around the economy.
You're goddamn right. Where can we get that Congress?
We've changed to a place where the image of the philanthropist is rightly thankful for the cash flow that they're providing, but less worried about the ability of philanthropists to magnify their influence through philanthropy. In particular, in the United States, philanthropy is tax favored more than it has been almost anywhere in the entire history of the world. So our legislation is not just permitting, but actually magnifying the impact of very large-scale philanthropy. Mm-hmm. And this can really move fields. So when you have, for example, a very small academic field researching, say, AI ethics or AI safety, and very large funders come in at one end of the field, all of a sudden everybody is saying what those very large funders want to hear. And that isn't to say that there's necessarily something wrong with the exercise of power in all cases, but I think people need to be really cognizant of how much power they exercise when they move these amounts of money. And the concern that even if you're wrong, you might get a lot of influence with your money rather than through the strength of argument.
Yes. And a lot of people won't realize it, too, right? Like, it's easy to convince oneself that the best thing is the thing that also works out for you.
Yeah. So, for example, say you were to donate hypothetically $600 million to a bunch of folks in Washington trying to advocate for a certain cause. I can predict that more people are going to care about that cause, and there's going to be more legislation about the cause. And it does not matter the merits of the cause. I do not need to name the cause, not just because everybody knows it, but because it doesn't matter the cause. And that's not to say that arguments don't also matter, but money matters too, and money doesn't always move in lockstep with arguments.
What, like, again, though, that sort of, at least from my understanding of what you just said, like, puts it back on those individuals who have that power already, at least in the current state of things. I guess the other option is legislators, but actually, even if they could do anything, it's not like it would matter because of the Supreme Court.
I think you're right. I think at least in the United States, we're in a regime where people are very, very hesitant to intervene on philanthropy. Currently, pretty much, if you're not scamming anybody and you're not falsely claiming to be a religion, there's very little they can do. You cannot shut down a philanthropy because you think they're inefficient or because they're pushing views that are scientifically discredited. And I don't think we will be moving into a society like that anytime soon, or maybe even should. So I think
Hmm.
there's a lot of need for people who made their money in markets that will definitely tell them when they're doing the wrong thing. Moving into philanthropy, which is the one market where everybody tells you what you want to hear and you get no feedback, to make sure that they're offering a competitive a competitive and like useful intervention, because the market will no longer tell them if they're offering the wrong thing.
Okay. And would this then go along the mentality of, I believe, like rethink priorities and some of the, I'm like going back to, I believe, some of the earlier EA kind of things earlier, like 12 or so years ago, of like cost benefit analysis, comparing, whatever you're doing to just a direct cash transfer to the same population or something like that.
Yes, I think that doing explicit analysis is important and also engaging with critics. So something I really like about this movement is that they know there's a very large chance that they could go wrong. And they're uniquely interested in listening to people who think they're wrong, to the extent that I've had grants from Open Philanthropy. I have a grant from the Survival and Flourishing Fund. I worked at the Global Priorities Institute. I've given talks at many effective altruist conferences. And this happens because I think these movements, at least to some extent, understand the dangers of getting into an echo chamber where you don't get any feedback or you don't get the right feedback. And I don't
But
want to
I
say
feel
they
like
always
that's
get it
so
right.
much
Certainly, I don't.
what, sorry, I just, I feel like that's so much what's happened though, that it is an echo chamber, that ideas that are being presented are not being given the same amount of like rigor that they should be. There's like a lot of groupthink and a lot of almost digging in to arguments that have sort of been established just because they're established. So like I do see what you're saying. There are a decent number of people that are cognizant about these things and are trying to engage, but then there's also a significant number of people who I don't I don't feel that the same way about, and I'm just having trouble like squaring those two things.
Yeah, so to be clear, when I say that some movements do a fairly good job trying to be aware of their limitations and trying to answer to critics, I do think it's important to bear in mind just how hard it is to avoid echo chambers, to avoid group dynamics, to avoid interpreting evidence to favor views you already hold. And
Hmm.
that when you do things like consume the same media, write on the same forums, live in the same houses, this can get a lot more difficult. But at the same time, I don't want to put this too much on the shoulders of any one movement, because it's not as though I think some people have biased beliefs about AI, but nobody has biased beliefs about vaccines. This happens everywhere in our lives. It's just a reminder that even some of the more exemplary practices of trying to break out of our own epistemic comfort zone as it is, maybe are not always going to be enough to counteract the kinds of believers we are.
Okay. And you mentioned like this isn't just about AI, but even just within AI, there's also other subgroups, right? There are the inherent or perpetual like hypers, promoters, and they sort of fully engaged with a very different side of the same argument, I think. do you have any thoughts of like, so a lot of this conversation, a lot of like the against the singularity hypothesis and that sort of thing
Yeah.
is more focused towards the EA long-termist like existential risk. But what about the people who have like bought into the singularity hypothesis and are like, singularity, let's go. Acceleration is the key. Often libertarians are closer aligned with this. So like how does what do you I don't know how to construct this question, but what do you think about them?
It's a good question. I think mostly I should engage more with these folks. Just as a sociological fact, I started kind of working with the people on the other end of the spectrum. I think I'm going to want to say the same thing in response to them that I'm going to say in response to the folks concerned about existential risk. Namely,
Mm-hmm.
there's a shared and very optimistic technological assumption about the speed and degree of progress we're going to see in AI. And that this
Mm-hmm.
very optimistic technological assumption might be a pitfall for both groups. So at the
So it
same
sort of goes
time,
back to that thing that we were talking earlier, where there's the like infinite payoff, there's the
yeah,
singularity hypothesis to the time of prosperity or
yes.
whatever.
Yeah, and so the thought is that, of course, we can have a debate about if radically super intelligent artificial agents came, would they kill us? Would they save us? Would they make life meaningless? But we also need to ask about the if, namely, why do we think radically super intelligent AI is right on the horizon? And I don't always see the kinds of grounds being offered for that claim that I'd like to see.
Gotcha. Okay. So then when it comes to like much more recent, so contemporary sort of conversations, this is October of 2025, starting in August, maybe a tiny bit before then, but with the release of GPT-5, people began to say again that like, well, actually not again, because last time it was a little bit of a different claim, but like there seems to be a vibe shift around essentially everyone that was talking about AI embracing this sort of singularity, like perpetually improving story and where we're at now. Where does that fit in, and how do you think that this is going to continue, that people are going to continue to sort of reveal, like pull off, I can't speak, continue to show that there is this sort of facade, or do you think this is just a little bump? Is there going to be an AI bubble burst, basically?
Honestly, I'm pretty hesitant about forecasting here, or at least about my ability to forecast. I think in the very early days, the 50s and the 60s, people made wildly optimistic claims. And when those didn't happen, when we didn't build AI in a summer, all of the responsible AI researchers, certainly all of the academics, stopped making very strong speculative claims about the future. And I think very recently it's come back into fashion for people to use their platform to speculate on where AI is heading.
Mm-hmm.
I think if any of us really knew, we would be trading on Wall Street right now and not telling you any of what we knew. And I think that the fact that I'm not trading all my money on a particular hypothesis about AI right now probably tells you that I should hold off from speculating. So I think maybe we need to think about the fact that our vibes are changing on a monthly basis and maybe take that as a reason to reflect on the basis for our vibes more than as, an opportunity to argue for our favorite vibe.
But it's just like 2 months out though.
It's hard, and it's very hard because many of the most responsible people still aren't forecasting, and they're being drowned out because they won't. But the problem is, people who are skeptical of AI progress have also been putting their foot in their mouth because they've also been making ungrounded forecasts and they've also been wrong. So, not to name names, but one way to make the people who think we're going to make a lot of progress really fast look good is say, oh, AI is never going to do X, and then in 6 months AI does X. So we need to be really careful on all sides about ungrounded forecasting because this can be something that everybody does when they shouldn't do it, and it doesn't look good when you're wrong.
Okay, now taking that into account, what is your hottest take regarding AI? Or the AI safety space or effective altruism.
Okay, honest take, feed the hungry, heal the sick. AI is important. People are still hungry. People are still sick. If we do this century right, they'll never be as hungry, never be as sick again. So let's start there.
Okay. I guess that's a pretty reasoned and reasonable hot take, though. Anything like, with credit to you, we did just come off of saying we probably shouldn't do super speculative forecasting, but anything even spicier?
Okay, a spicier sentence before that. Peter Singer was right. Feed the hungry, heal the sick.
Okay. And then I'd like to end with two questions that I ask everyone. So the first is what? A lot of this discussion has already been about this to some extent, but what grinds your gears or really irritates you about your work or the space or the people that are in it, any aspect of what you do? What really is something you could live without?
Yeah. There are many extremely well-qualified people writing on AI existential risk, but they aren't always writing fully rigorous papers that I can respond to. So currently I only have two papers, one on the Singularity, one on power seeking. Why? Because those are the only two areas where the arguments have gotten to the point where I think they can take a high-level response. And so
Okay.
I really like the people, and they know who they are, with the ability to be producing world-leading research, to be producing world-leading research in support of their views, if nothing else, because that makes it easier to respond to it, and hopefully will start the kind of a conversation they'd like to see.
And that's, I guess, just to even be more explicit to make sure I'm understanding. Instead of, for example, Anthropic or OpenAI creating a quote unquote paper that is not peer reviewed at all and has no sort of third party check on it, it would be great if they actually submitted it to a journal and went through the process of peer review and engaging with that in a rigorous way so that they could put out something that was really high quality. OpenAI and Anthropic don't attend the big conferences at all, but they still put out work that parades around as if it's an academic paper.
And that's the best case. That stuff is, moderately good. A lot of what I'm getting sent is AI alignment forum posts, less wrong posts, blog posts, Discord chats. And I'm being asked, why haven't you addressed these arguments for the Singularity? And obviously, I would like them to submit themselves to peer review, but we could start with a paper. Sometimes a good paper is, enough of an ask.
Yeah. I mean, even a workshop paper in machine learning workshops are pretty accessible.
Yeah.
And it's a good start. At least it gets some amount of review. And it also opens things up a little bit more as well.
Yeah.
And then the last question, what's your favorite part about what you do or the people you work with or any aspect of what you do? Why do you enjoy it? What is it and why do you enjoy it?
I literally get paid to think and write all day in a beautiful place with smart people. It is a job with okay salary, but very, very high job satisfaction for a reason. It's a great job and I love doing it.
Awesome. David, thank you so much for joining. I know we didn't get to, AI power seeking really much at all. That was intentional because I wanted to really focus on the Singularity and then sort of the aspects of this argument. But maybe we can have you back on at some point to discuss the other one. But yeah, it was great. Great to have you.
Great talking to you. Thank you for having me.
And that's the interview. I had a great time chatting with David and getting into the weeds on some pretty advanced topics, as well as getting a philosopher's perspective on long-termism and bounded rationality. If you found his thoughts as interesting as I did, make sure you check out some of his papers and his blog, which are all linked in the show notes. As always, you can listen to an extended cut of this episode on the Kairos FM Patreon for just $2 a month. If you enjoyed this interview or otherwise have any criticisms of our ideas for the program, leave us a review. It helps us make the show better and improves the likelihood that more people will hear it. Thanks so much. See you next time.